Okay, this section of notes, we are going to be looking at the cultural landscapes and identities. Your last section in regards to the cultural unit. The first major section that we're going to look at is the symbolic landscapes and sense of place within that. What I want to identify is cultural landscapes, because we're going to identify 4 different cultural landscapes. What a cultural landscape is that it's a cultural identity that's reflected through the architecture, through the artifacts, and through the layout of what you create in the environment. That's what you're looking at in regards to cultural landscapes. And there's 4 different types of cultural landscapes that we're going to look at. The first is designed. What a designed cultural landscape is talking about is they consciously designed. It's consciously designed to embody what the architect wants to embody, meaning he's creating something on purpose, and the layout of that aspect is for a specific purpose. An example of that is like Vatican City in Rome, and the architecture of Vatican City in Rome, and the layout of Vatican City is for a specific purpose in regards to the Roman Catholic faith. And you can see in the picture there that there's a specific reason that things were laid out the way that they were. Now the next that I want to look at is vernacular landscape. A vernacular landscape is a landscape that comes about through the use of people over time. In other words, these are landscapes that come out from what people do in regards to their daily lives. Some examples of that is like the Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico. You can see people groups within a vernacular landscape, like in the American South, and a vernacular type of architecture that you see during the 19th century is kind of the dog trot house, and it showed their lifestyle through their usage of the land and what they needed and to cool the house, essentially. But again, a vernacular landscape is like a vernacular region. Just think of it's embodying that culture within its creation. The next type of cultural landscape that we're looking at is like a historical site. A historical site is like a landscape that is important because of a historical event that took place there. An historical cultural landscape could be like Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, probably one of my favorite examples because the Civil War is my favorite era of history. But that could be a historic site because something historical, the American Civil War, took place there. The last one that we're going to look at, the last type of cultural landscape is ethnographic landscape. This is a landscape that contains both natural and cultural resources that are important to a certain group of people, like the Ganges River. You've got the natural elements of the Ganges River and its importance for supplying water, but then you've also got the religious aspect of the Ganges River with Hinduism and its importance of talking about how it purifies itself. So it's got a both environmental, and you also have a human side that's creating things on top of this landscape. That's holding this resource as important, and you can tie people to resources within an ethnographic type of landscape. And again, the Ganges River with Hinduism. Now, the last are just key terms in regards to cultural landscapes, one of which is like a landscape of consumption. What this means is this is an area that is created in regards for people to spend money on. Maybe like a mall. It's a landscape of consumption because people not necessarily are consuming things of eating, they can be, but consuming meaning purchasing. Like a theme park. It has a landscape of consumption because the whole idea about it is for people to go to spend money, to have fun, but also to spend money. The next is a secular landscape. You can have a secular landscape because it's talking about an area that is not associated with religion. It ties away from the religion. So like the Great Wall of China, for example. That's an example of a secular landscape because it has nothing to do with religion. All right, moving on. Our next major heading is formation and identity. What we're looking at here, what I want to look at is kind of like the mental map. This is your idea about things. When you think about a place, this is how you visualize the place. And so you visualize it through things like landmarks and nodes. Nodes meaning central points that you're thinking of. So you have central important nodes within your mental map that are very clear. And then your edges of your mental map, again, are blurry because your focus on what you're thinking about of an area is focusing on certain node. And what you remember about the area is kind of like the landscapes, the landforms, and the landmarks. That's what you see in regards to mental map. And we use mental maps to come up with place names and place creation type. Toponym is the idea, and it's the name which you give a geographical place its name. It's the idea of naming a place. And toponymity, again, is the art of naming places. That'd be a fun job, just to name places. But what we see in toponym is topophilia. Topophilia is how you feel about a place. Topophilia is what my heart is representing here. We name things based off of how a place makes us feel. Sometimes places are named off of founders, off of important people. Some, like Washington. Sometimes places are named by religious things, like St. Louis, St. Paul. Sometimes places are named by the origin of its settlers. For example, in North America, a lot of the cities are like British. In Australia, you also have some British influence on the names because the language and the people groups that were there before us were the British. And then in Portuguese, you see a lot of Brazilian names because that's the place that colonized Portugal. And you see Spanish elements elsewhere in Latin America. So it might be those reasons why you're coming up with a toponym with a name. And it could be physical features as well. There could be a lot of things that create name. My next heading is cultural attitudes and practices in regards to the environment. What I want to look at here is vernacular architecture. When you see vernacular architecture, I want you to think folk architecture. This is the ideas about a place, but more in regards to folk architecture. Now, there's three main points I want to talk about in regards to vernacular architecture. One is it reflects both cultural and environmental elements. You're going to see aspects of the environment as well as aspects of culture within vernacular architecture. It's also based on the resources that are available, and we'll get to those resources in just a little bit. And then the houses within different regions can be vastly different, even with similar environments, because in a region, the houses within that region can be vastly different because of the culture and the environment. What that means is the environment could be the same, but you could still have different houses. Maybe people's ideas about places, maybe the culture groups that are there are different. So just because a geographical region is made up does not mean all the houses within that region have to look the same. Culture is going to change that as well. But the materials used. A lot of times you see wood used. Wood is used when it's available in areas of forestry because it's easy to work with and it's very sturdy. You also see a lot of brick in a lot of the hot and arid climates of southwestern United States as well as in Mexico. You see brick. You also see adobe, which is made out of kind of the same similar muds. These types of houses. And there's a key word here in regards to the curriculum of diurnal climates. Diurnal climates are climates that vary dramatically, so it can get really cold and it can get really hot. And in a lot of the really dry areas, because there's not a lot of moisture in the air, the temperature can change dramatically. And you see a lot of adobe houses and brick houses in both of these climates because it supports both. It's good insulation. You can have ventilation. You can close ventilation. But adobe is in a lot of the diurnal areas, and a lot of the reasons is it's the resource that's available in the areas that change so dramatically. And again, like in New Mexico and the southwestern United States. Now, I want to look at on this slide, even though I don't have it, I want to look at four different houses that are found in the same region. In a lot of the Chinese villages in the same geographic region, you have different types of houses. One type of house is the Kashgar house. Within the Kashgar house, you have a second floor that's open because there can be cool breezes, but not real windy, and so people like to go up there to hang out. There's a lot of trees planted in the Kashgar types of houses for shading in that top open patio area. There's also Turpin Houses. These are smaller houses that have open courtyards, usually one level. You also have the Yinchuan, which are built around a large open-air courtyard. A lot of these are Muslim residents, and the courtyards are used for privacy that's in between these houses, and so it's this kind of private quarters for you to go to. And you've also got the Diuhuan, which are walled courtyards with open lattice grapes growing up on some of the lattices that they have. Again, just a picture for you to see that within one region, there's four different types of houses within these Chinese villages. And it all depends on the environment as well as the culture, like with the Diuhuan, which is the more Muslim, or not the Diuhuan, I'm sorry, the Yinchuan, which is the Muslim areas, and you need that courtyard for privacy. Again, just examples of the different cultures. Now we're under the same unit, same heading, but I want to look at folk housing hearths in the United States, and there's three different one of those. One is the Mid-Atlantic folk housing hearth. The beginning of this folk house in the Mid-Atlantic region. This is referred to as the I house. Generally, it's 2 full stories high. You have 1 room deep, and you have 2 rooms wide within the I house, kind of like the letter I. And this spreads and moves westward and southward along the Appalachian Mountains, that type of housing. The next is a lower Chesapeake and Tidewater type of cultural hearth in regards to housing. These are usually 1 story. You have steep roofs. You have chimneys on either side of these. And this type of housing spreads southeast along the coast of the United States. Then you also have the New England type of folk housing hearth. This is the boxed shape with a central hall within this, and then the houses on either side of that, the rooms on either side of that hall. You see that a lot of the New England type houses spread into the Great Lakes region as all the way west into Wisconsin. Again, these are the folk housing hearths. Now you've got some pop housing hearths, and you've got a picture that's shown up right now in your video. Pop housing, you can see, is houses that show influence of shapes, materials, detailing, and other features of architectural style. The dominant type of house construction in the United States was minimal traditional during the late 1940s and early 1950s. You see followed by ranch houses during the late 1950s and 60s. The split level house was a popular variant of the ranch between the 50s and 70s, and the contemporary style was popular for architectural design houses during the same period. The shed was widely built in the late 1960s. Neo-Eclectic Styles, beginning with a mansard, were in vogue during the late 1960s. The Neo-Tudor was popular in the 1970s, and the Neo-French in the 1980s. The Neo-Colonial style has been widely built since the 1950s, but has never dominated popular architecture. And you can see how these types of houses have changed throughout the centuries during the United States in regards to where they are and also what people are needing and what people want. Last but not least, there's one main topic we need to cover, and that's indigenous. Indigenous peoples are the beginning peoples of the area. When you say indigenous, I want you to think folk. Okay, folk culture, folk houses, folk music, folk clothes, folk food. This is what goes in regards to the indigenous peoples. These are the early peoples. And one area of the world that is largely indigenous is in Canada. It's called Nunavut. It's far north. It's the one where you see kind of the island stretching up. Very, very cold. You have the Inuit people, the Eskimo type people, and these are the indigenous peoples that are living in the area. And Canada literally created this territory so that these indigenous peoples would not be bothered, so they could be there. And again, this is where you'll see the folk. Everything folk goes with indigenous.